there's keys to life. They're the same keys to design thinking. So let's talk about what I mean by that. Context. So first off, one of the reasons I go through that exercise is to show you how important context is. If you look at this, it doesn't make any sense. If you look at this, it doesn't make any sense. But when you create something with that, in order for a user to digest it, it starts to make sense. So context is really important. And that's one thing that I really got out of sort of my background and my life, and why I think I have a special perspective on design thinking. 2 is curiosity. You can tell I traveled a lot. I think if you travel a lot, you have a certain innate curiosity. I think curiosity is a key to life, and I also think curiosity is a key to design thinking. And then last but not least is empathy. And we're going to talk a lot about empathy today, because ¿cómo se dice empathy en español? Empatía. I can't tell you, this is something that I've learned more and more and more as time's gone on. If somebody had told me this 20 years ago, I would have said, okay, I get it. Somebody told it 15 years ago, I said, oh yeah, no, definitely. 10 years ago, yes. Now, I think empathy, especially now I have 2 children, I'm married. I think without empathy, you lack a certain amount of soul. I think empathy is key not only for me, not only for all of you, but for culture, for the world, for everything. And I think empathy is really important to think about in regard to, I think that I learned about empathy for a number of reasons. One, I was lucky, my family and the family I have now has really taught me that, but also I think my background and the context with which I was raised and the things that I've seen and the places I've been have really endeared me to having a lot of empathy. And I want us to sort of think about empathy, because I think a lot of us go through our day-to-day life. Hopefully somebody falls down, we help them up. Hopefully somebody tells you they had a hard day, we care about them. I think empathy, be it within the agency experience, within being a developer, being a designer, being whatever your role is, empathy will make you better at your job. And I think that's one thing that we sometimes lack, because we think that our jobs are much more clinical than that, much more narrow in scope than that. But I think all of us would be better at our jobs if we really worked on our empathy, or had a lot of understanding of being an empathetic person. So let's talk about what this means and why. I'm going to play this video really quickly, and she's going to talk a little bit about it, but again, in a very theoretical way.
My name is Emmy Kalawale. I'm the editor-in-residence at the D School at Stanford, currently on sabbatical from the Washington Post. Empathy is, well, there's a textbook definition. Empathy is putting yourself in somebody else's shoes. But it's more than that. I think empathy it's a chance to fall in love. It's a chance to hate. It's a chance to be completely other than that which you usually are. And in so doing, to discover so many other things about life and about living. Well, I realize at the heart of human-centered design, because people are at the heart of human-centered design. It's about understanding. And in order to have true human-centered design, you have to understand the people you are designing for. You have to understand their needs. And you have to be able to seize that moment that just happens when you're really jumping into somebody else's situation, somebody else's shoes. I can't come up with any new ideas if all I do is exist in my own life, in my own existence. In order to get to new solutions, I have to get to know new people. I have to get to know different people, different scenarios, different places. I have to travel. I have to immerse. I have to dive into something completely different. Yeah, if you're not surprised, I would hazard a guess you're doing it wrong.
Cool. So this video doesn't have any. You've seen these before. This is called This is called Newton's Cradle. You've all seen them before, I think. You'd hit one, and then it sort of kicks off a reaction that continues on and on and on. In a lot of ways, I think of empathy as being that initial ball that you're pulling back. I'm not sure exactly how or where to say this, but just because I want to boil it down a little bit for everybody in the room. Like, if you're a developer, I think the designers in the room probably have empathy. They're thinking about how the user's going to use what they're designing a lot of the time, hopefully.
That's very enough.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of ways we'll get more specific about how you can gather the information that the user wants in order to, produce those designs that meet that. But I think for the developers in the room, because I know there's a lot of developers in the room, you'll be fine at your job if you don't have empathy. You'll be fine, You'll get by. You'll be an okay developer. But if you're a developer that's developing with empathy, you will have the opportunity to sort of be a kick-ass developer. And I'll tell you why that is. There's a number of reasons. Because if you have empathy as a developer, what you're going to do is you're going to be thinking about others as you're developing. So who are you going to be thinking about? One, you'll be thinking about your fellow developer. You'll be commenting your code better. You'll be developing it in a more thoughtful way so that other people can read your code well. You'll be developing in a way that's going to not cut corners so that it's a more well-rounded product at the end of the day and can be scaled better or improved upon better. We've all, well, not we've all, but a lot of people have worked on projects where you're sort of like handed the project after some other team has worked on it or someone else has worked on it, and it's crap. It's crap code. And I think if you approach development with the mindset of empathy, you would never sort of do that in the first place. And I think at the end of the day, it's nice to develop things and do things with that sort of as sort of what's driving you. The other person you should be thinking about outside of the other developer is, or someone else who's going to come in and look at your code or use your code at some point, or is the customer. I mean, they're paying the bills, right? And they're paying you to do a job. And I think it's important to think about them and what product you're producing, and that you're producing a stellar product for them. I think it's only fair to them, and I think it's only fair to yourself. And the last person that you're thinking about, not the last person, the third person, is obviously the user. Especially, there's so many ways people think that development is just, I'm not a designer, to quote Diego last night. I'm bad at design. But still, if you're doing front-end code and there's an interaction that could be a better interaction that wasn't maybe documented very well on the user experience side or wasn't documented at all, they said there's just this form field. We've all used sites that are more fluid, that feel good to use them. As a developer, you can develop the basic stuff. You can develop something that works because there was some code that you reused that it's fine and it gets the job done and no one's going to say anything. Or you can develop code that's actually a pleasure for other people to use. So in that way, you all are designers and you're using design thinking when you do those things. Yeah.
What would you say would be the opposite of empathy?
Whoa.
Indifference.
I think that's really good. I guess I don't think it's necessarily a negative. It's not like, usually when you think of an opposite, you think like, okay, what's the opposite of happiness? It's sadness, which is like really polar, right? I think the opposite of empathy is indifference. Now, indifference, you can get by with indifference. That's the interesting thing about it, right? It's not egregious. It's not obvious to people that you're indifferent. Some of the time it will be, but for the most part, I know a lot of developers that are indifferent. And they're okay. Are they the ones I enjoy working with? No. Are they the ones I enjoy using their websites or their apps? No. And are they the ones I enjoy spending time with? Not because they're bad people. I think people who are indifferent are just not as interesting. They're more boring. So I think indifference is, I think you nailed it. Yeah.
What's the word for indifference in Spanish? Because it sounds like something.
Cool. So I just want to get in, again, so we started off really high. I'm going to start boiling it down and getting to the more specifics. We're going to maybe take it to the middle range now. Before we were at, 10,000 meters, and now we're going to go to 5,000 meters. I want to talk about, so I want you to leave understanding what design thinking is. So if you read about it or you see it or you want to learn more, that you understand what it is. And there's some quotes up here, and I'll read them to you. Just try to take them in as much as possible, but I'll highlight what's important. Well, I'll just highlight it now. Design thinking is a people-centered model that encourages creativity and innovation to create a product or service that identifies and solves a complex problem for your user. What I think is the most important thing to take away in regard to thinking or understanding what design thinking is it's people-centered. You can have empathy for various things. You can have empathy for an animal. You can have empathy for people. You can have empathy for plants. You probably want to have empathy for the desk. You have empathy for living things. So in this case, we're usually not designing things for dogs. So we're designing things for people. So it's really a people-centered model. It's considering others. It encourages creativity and innovation. It makes you, it sort of is a Kickstarter in regard to doing things that are design-focused. And you're basically creating. And I'm going to hold on here. I'm going to say it actually identifies the issues. When we get to the talk later on, if we do, I think Agile actually is great at solving the issue. I think design thinking is great at identifying the issue. So we'll get into that maybe later on. What is special about this way of thinking? It's a process. So we're going to talk about the process. It's a 5-step process. Obviously, it could be distilled into hundreds of microprocesses, but it's 5 steps. It's relatively easy to understand, and it's systematic. So you can go step by step, and by the end of the process, you'll be farther along in having a better designed whatever you're doing. So again, identify and solve. Who can use design thinking? This one's for Diego. Everyone can, Diego. I know you're having a rough morning, dude, but this one... No, because yesterday, again, not to harp on Diego, because he's the only one I spoke to about this yesterday, and this is what I hear all the time, though, is I'm a developer, I don't really do design. I'm a designer, I don't really think about the developer. I hear these things all the time. I can do this and I can't do this, or I'm good at this, but I'm not good at this. And forgive my language, but that's bullshit. We all, if you're selling yourself short if you approach it with that mentality. Because believe me, I'm not a great designer, but I can design. I'm not a great developer, but I can develop. I'm not really great at very much, but I know how to apply design thinking to all these things, and that makes me that much better. So I think even if you can't, the best you can draw is a stick figure on the paper, that's okay. We're gonna walk you through, I'm gonna hopefully teach you a process that will allow you then to at least be creative in a way that will allow you to apply design thinking in different areas. And then where can it be used? It can be used everywhere. We're gonna talk obviously a little bit more about development, design, agency work, websites, apps, but it's interesting. You can start to apply this everywhere. And what happens is that when you start to apply it in different places, you probably start applying it at work, hopefully in some capacity. Maybe not every day, maybe not to the T, but you'll start applying it. And then what happens is you start applying it, I'm cooking food tonight, and you might apply it in that way. Or I'm trying to accomplish some task, and you'll apply it in that way. It's really a set of thinking processes that are not just specific to the world that we're working in, and right here, right now, it's applicable to everything. You can use it everywhere, anytime, at any speed. And I think this is important. So we're going to talk about these 5 steps. They're general. We'll get into more specifics later again. But what's important to think about is I'm going to outline the 5 steps right now. You don't have to start at step 1. You can start at step 5. You can start at step 3. Use whatever's the most appropriate, especially if you're doing development, you're halfway through a project, and maybe the project got off the ground too quickly, or maybe the client didn't have the right budget to do as much user experience or design work as you wanted. The situation is never going to be perfect. Life is never going to be perfect. So, take what you can from this and use it. Don't feel like you're locked in any sort of process. So, let's start with number 1. First step to design thinking is empathy. We've talked about that. We all kind of get that now. Caring about a person, caring about what you're working on, caring about the people around you, caring about the client, caring about the user. At the end of the day, what I most care about when I'm doing agency work, this type of work, is the user. I want the client to be happy. We turn back on the air, is it? Sure. Okay. I want the client to be happy, but the client's gonna be happy if the user's happy, and they're making money. But usually they'll make more money if the user's happy. So we'll come back to this, but this is really the big one. Regardless of which of these 5 steps you end up using, or if you use them in the proper order, the key is always empathy. You're always considering the user. Second is define. So, get narrow and identify the problem. So if you're speaking with a user, what are their pain points? Where are they running into problems? Why are they having trouble? What do they want to accomplish? And how can we allow them to accomplish that as seamlessly as possible? Defining is really key. And oftentimes, the best sort of way to do this, and we can walk through some deliverables, I've worked on projects where we had the budget to do user experience, or informational interviews. What does that mean? We got to interview the staff. We got to interview the users. We got to interview what they called thought leaders, people in the industry that were really smart about this subject matter. Those are rare where you have the budget to do that and you can actually go through and do that, but that's awesome to do because then you're really understanding it from different points of view. Another way you can define, which we've done, is a competitive analysis. You just look at other people in the arena. You're just going to build a website that's selling tires. Who else is selling tires and how are they doing it? What we've done is get really specific. Take spreadsheets. A lot of this is very not technical, very rudimentary. Take spreadsheets and identify 10 competitors, identify the features they have on their site, and then do an analysis of which sites has those features, which don't. You can start to see which features are maybe necessary to having that type of site, or if you see the same feature over and over again, you really start to question, do we need that, or why do they have that? Trying to think of other things that we've delivered. We'll get through some of those, but there's a lot of ways you can sort of do that definition of what the problem is, and then you sort of get into the ideate. So you've done all this work where you've defined what the problem is, what other people are doing, and this is where the fun part is, if you want to be somewhat creative, is this is where you get to just take a piece of paper and draw on it if you want. This is where you get to take these Legos and just build something if you want. This is where you get to sort of like come up with these big ideas and these solutions that might work, might not work, might fit in the client's budget, might not fit in the client's budget, might drive Eric crazy, might not, I don't know. But that's the fun part where you can sort of start to generate ideas. Then once you've built, I kind of jumped ahead with the Legos. I guess the Legos would be probably more in the prototype. So you'd ideate, you'd sketch, you'd have these big ideas, then you think, okay, well, how is it applicable? What am I going to do with it? I'm going to prototype it. I'm going to build something, I'm going to build a piece of software, I'm going to build an interactive wireframe, I'm going to maybe do a design and build a clickable prototype and envision. Lots of ways you can prototype to try to demo this. And then finally, you test it. You test it with users, you test it by running A/B tests, you test it by doing whatever heat maps. I mean, there's 50 million ways you can test now. Remote surveys online. And then after that's done, you repeat. And you go through the process again, you go through the process again, you go through the process again. Rarely do you have a budget to even do these 5 steps the way you want to do them. Rarely do you have a budget to do that again. But if you get the right client who really gets it, this process will, I think, the clients I've had where they were willing to go through this process and willing to work with us on this, and willing to do this, iteration and release early and improve upon the product and never be done, those are the successful clients because they get it and they get it, and you build better software that way. Again, one thing I really want to emphasize is again, there may not be the budget, or you may be halfway through the project and you want to do something, you can test without doing the rest of this. You can maybe even try to ideate on something. Maybe you're working on a site and most everything's defined, and you just want to, there's an interactive, like a wizard or something where a client's going to choose a product and you're supposed to walk them through the process. You can just ideate on that part of the project. So there's a lot of ways you can use this, and only use bits and pieces of it if you want. So I'm going to pause because I've been talking.